week when the editor got edited. And so
Oh.
I edit the editor-in-chief, and she edits me. Of course, she doesn't write that much now, but so we have this reciprocal arrangement where only she can edit me and only I edit her. And so what was interesting about it is, I mean, everybody, it just acknowledges the fact that everybody needs to be edited, in the sense that you need objective eyes on what you do. And Clark, are you getting ready to go swimming?
Oh, don't make me cry. I haven't been swimming in 2 months.
So the thing you want in editing, which is really the hallmark of good editing, is, I mean, you need the objective eyes. I try to provide my own objective eyes, which is, I like to put something away for a couple of days. Don't always have the leisure to do that. I mean, if I'm late and writing on deadline, but I do like to look at it and clean up my own stuff. And I'm a pretty good judge, not a perfect judge. So having an editor, a good editor, gauges what your goal is and what your tone is and what your rhythm is, if it works, and furthers that. And good editing is when you look at it and it's helping you be and say what you want to say, not changing it really just for the sake of changing it. I love nothing more than seeing an article that I really don't have to make a lot of changes to. I mean, that pleases me. So my editor-in-chief, she made one change, kind of a subhead in the middle of the article, to something totally inscrutable, which she recognized was inscrutable. And then all she said was, this is an article on grief, and I finished it. I liked the tone of it. I liked where it ended, but she felt so it started at the beginning. It actually starts with Keely Mooneyhan's story of the death of her husband's sister, sudden, unexplained death, and nobody could go to the East Coast where she lived, and everything was just bottled up. No one even knew. It was hard to find out when you're at a distance. Between the quarantine, they couldn't travel. It would have been more of a curse than a consolation to travel. So there were all kinds of ways in which the grief remained unexpressed and in which nobody could gather. So the death took on this air of unreality. And I had a couple of long talks with Keely, who is allowing me to use that anecdote, because it symbolizes so much what the problems are during this pandemic. And that's where there is a concrete death. I mean, there are so many losses of things that we can't even articulate: the loss of predictability, the loss of routines, the loss of little things we don't even, in our day, that brought us some marker of something that we needed that we don't even realize is missing. And so that's where my article began, with Keely's story, and it ended with some really interesting conversation with a researcher who is doing phenomenal research on grief and is a real human being and understands what people's model of having to grieve is, and is trying to shift it based on the work that he did. And he means so much to me because, and my story actually is in the article too, the story of when my husband died and my response to that, which probably a little counterintuitive. And his work was the only thing that made sense to me in my experience. I just did not follow the prescribed cultural pattern of grief. I grieved for a very long time, but I never lost my sense of humor. I never lost my capacity for fun. And, you know, these episodes of sadness and grief would move in on me like squalls in a rainforest and then be over and the sun would be out. And so all of that is explained in the article. And but my editor-in-chief wanted me to kind of come back to the pandemic at the end. I don't think it's a totally unreasonable request. Otherwise I, you know, would have fought it. But I mean, there is that classic thinking in nonfiction, journalistic writing where you have to end by going back to the beginning. And I think many times you have to bring the article around. I don't always think you have to articulate it. I think it ends with the information and the tone of the beginning. But I'm, you know, it's a reasonable enough request to me that this is not a hill I want to die on. I'd be very happy to add, you know, a paragraph or two to demonstrably bring it back to the opening topic of the pandemic. So here am I, you know, the editor being edited, and I'm always curious about what someone is going to find when I'm being edited, what someone finds and what they want to do. And what I love is when someone says, hey, you know, this is good, and suggests a couple of changes that make it even better. I mean, that's happened. And that's the mark of good editing. If you feel like this is furthering your goal, this is furthering your voice, this is maybe asking a question or two that encourages you to think further along the same lines that you were going. So I didn't have that happen, but it did kind of fall in, the editing did fall into sort of moving in the direction that I was going in. So I survived being edited this week.
Was the researcher that person who wrote the book, The Other Side of Sadness?
George Bonanno?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I've given that book to at least 15 people.
Well, so Clark, I have to tell you. So I think I've spoken to George one or two times, maybe in the past 10 years. And George and I wound up having a Zoom call that lasted 3 hours.
Wow.
And it was just the most amazing conversation I had. I mean, when you think, okay, this is the topic of grief. Yes, it's a very good book. His thinking has really been very original on the topic. His research has really been good. He's really struggling now, working. He did a revise of the book that came out last year,
I didn't know that. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. I have to go. I'm going to get it as soon as I get off the call.
yeah,
Wow.
2019 update. And he's working on a book now that kind of pulls all of that together with some more stuff about human resilience. And
Oh, that's great.
here's the thing about him. He's in this weird position. This is what I love. He's in this weird position of having to persuade people that they have more resources, more inner resources than they believe that they have. And that's the crazy position our culture is in. It's kind of persuaded everyone they're a victim and traumatized by everything, and you need to grieve for it. Go through all these stages.
Right, right.
And with the utmost tenderness and the utmost respect, he just has evidence to the contrary. So yes, I'm so glad you know.
Oh, it's sensational.
I'm so happy to hear that.
One of the I literally got, is it chills? What is that? It's a, yes, it is chills because the hairs on my arm stood up. There are just very few books in my life where I read them and it was in some way transformative. Plato's Republic was one of them. Machiavelli's The Prince was another.
Yeah.
So it's a strange list of books. But this was really one of them. I mean, it was.
What drew you to it in the first place?
Let's try to see. Wonder if I can recall what it was. It might have been, I'll have to look in my journal. It might have been that my brother died and my father died in the same year. And two other people I knew who were close friends died unexpectedly. And I wasn't that upset about my father or brother dying. That was part of it, I think. And I think it might have been as well that my sister, she had cancer at the same time. She had ovarian cancer, and she felt guilty. I think this is it. She felt guilty about not feeling more mournful about our brother and our father. So I think that was it. But it's such a great book.
It is.
And that morning, well, it also, I generally don't believe in stages theories. So I don't generally believe. So it's like I have a transcendental view. Yeah, transcendental views. There are people who teach that in decision making, you need to go through these 7 steps. In negotiation, you need to go through these 4 stages. And my feeling is, or in interrogating someone, you need to go through these 7 stages. It's usually 7, right? It's usually 7 because people think 7 plus or minus 2.
5, 7, yeah.
Yeah, 5, 7, yeah. So so I'm generally skeptical of that. But it is, it really spoke a little bit to my experience with my brother and my father. But it was really so funny to connect it with the resilience. I'm developing a course to teach next spring on resilience, which is partly informed by the mindful self-compassion protocol and classes, which is in a sense about resilience. So yeah, I really, I think people are held back by the idea that they have to go through some set of stages. But the worst one is this grief one. I mean, that's just...
Right. And that of course is, the raison d'etre for the book. But the chapter on sadness is just captured me, because he does full justice to sadness and what it does and why we need it, and then moves beyond that. And I mean, I just love that. And the purpose of sadness? Well, sadness turns us inward, and we're sad because, we've lost something that has meaning. We have to find the meaning so that we know what we need to replace in our life. And it turns us inward, and we tune out the world some, and we figure things out. And what we have to do is we kind of have to adjust that mental representation in our brain that helps us predict, what we expect from that person that we lost. And it's just such a beautiful rendering of the role of sadness. I just love that.
Oh, that's incredible. That's
Yeah.
incredible. That's yeah, I was just what is the movie? He's also, the other reason why I know him or know of him is that he is a Paul Ekman postdoc. And Paul, when I asked him about the book, he said, "Oh yes, I read the book. It's a very good account of a certain type of mourning." It was so classic Paul. He is the master of diminishing.
That's funny. So, yeah, no, I think that what I hope is that George demolishes this belief that we all are deficient unless we go through all these stages in this sequenced way. And, there've been modifications. Well, it's not one after the other. It's not necessarily a sequence. That doesn't cut it. It's really, it's not necessary. And, the biggest loss, I mean, my husband died, that was a big loss, but the biggest loss for me was the death of my twin sister. And that it's hard to explain. Not that we were the world's closest, but there is a bond that's pre-verbal. I can't even articulate the sadness I feel sometimes. I can't even predict when it'll sneak up on me sometimes. So, and, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And just from that, it's like this thing that just descends sometimes and then lets up. There are no stages. It just happens. And one of the things that George said in talking to me, and I had told him about my experience, and the funny part of my experience, 6 days after my husband died, I kept an appointment with my publisher and the publicist who were shepherding my next book into print at that time. And I never told anyone that 6 days later I was at this meeting, because I thought everyone would think I was totally callous and uncaring. And so George and I had this big discussion about it. And, he explained to me what was going on. And he explained to me by telling me that one of the stories that he particularly liked was C.S. Lewis wrote a memoir about his wife's death. And in that memoir, he described the grief that he felt as, this goes back because it's wartime, but he described it as First World War, post-World War I, as sort of a bomber. So the plane comes in, it circles around, drops its load, goes back, takes a long time to circle around, and then drops its load. And that was kind of like my experience too. This load, like in the middle of nowhere, and then whoops, it's over. So George and I had this great conversation. It was, and when we got afterwards, he said, this has been fun. And it was. I mean, to have a fun conversation about grief, it's doesn't happen every day.
No. I feel like I've been keeping this list of the the upside of the pandemic. And I think that, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the conversations like that, at least the ones that I've had with people I haven't seen in a while, and then it goes on. From my perspective, it wouldn't have been possible otherwise. People were so overly scheduled and overly, what is that, fear of missing out. So people had specific things they had to do, and then there were a million other things that were like in their mind that they should do rather than talk to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And including me. I mean, I don't mean to absolve myself of my role in that. I'm so glad you had that conversation. I'm so glad I found out about the second edition of the book. That's amazing. I mean, that's just, it's such a gift what he's done. I mean, it's really, and for me, my mom basically died of depression, many serious episodes. My sister has a variation of bipolar disorder, and I've had a few depressive episodes when I was younger. And so what I got from the book was that, I mean, I've gotten it from other places as well, was that, like you say with the bomber episode, the imagery, it's like, oh, if I feel sad, for many years, I thought if I feel sad, I'm gonna end up like my mom. I had to keep sadness at bay. As opposed to like, oh yeah, I can feel sad and I can cry and I could mope around.
And it isn't gonna overwhelm you. And
right, and it's not the end. Right, it's not the end, yeah. Right, it could just be like a tropical storm's too much. It could be like an afternoon shower as opposed to, or it could be a tropical storm that lasts for a couple of days, but it doesn't mean the world has come to an end.
Yeah.
When you guys are talking about this is so deep and meaningful. I mean, it's really powerful to hear, you know, and you guys are moving with all of this, and it's moving me to hear it. Now, when you write, if someone's editing you, how does that feel? Because that's raw and personal. When you write something, like, clearly this is meaningful. Like, how do you?
Well, you know, every time you
that, and then does it hurt to have someone edit you? Does it? Yeah, that's true. But there's some that you're say writing about something you see. There's a distance. Was it hard for you to be edited just now with this?
No, because the editor really caught the spirit of it. I mean, there was no editing of the content. And her note to me was, oh, wow, you know, I get this. And there was nothing changed in the entire body. It was just, hey, I think maybe it needs an ending that demonstrably brings it back to the beginning, whereas I have an implicit return to the beginning. I mean, that, you know, okay, you know. I mean, if you insist, I mean, it doesn't interfere or in any way interrupt the body of the story that I wanted to tell in the tone I wanted to tell it. It was very hard to get that tone because I had the shingles all the way through it, and I was suffering, and it affected my mood in the sense that it made me apathetic, not depressed, but apathetic, which for me might just as well be depressed, because, you know, normally I'm kind of, you know, more on the sort of out there side, and that was rough for me. And of course, to get into that tone, you have to have a headspace that you can get into, and I'm getting bombarded by my CEO and being asked to, oh, just drop what you're doing and, you know, jump onto this and jump onto that. I literally quit. I literally quit my job in the middle of writing my article. I had to, and to get everyone off my back. And of course, it didn't stick, but I mean, the cost was so high that, I mean, I just had to do that. So, but the editing would have been bad or my writing could have been not successful if the editor came in, you know, and just said, well, you know, you got to shift this, you got to shift that. I am taking it from her reading that it was successful in achieving what I wanted to achieve. So, I mean, that to me is the mark of success. I don't always invest so much. I never write about myself, ever. And I did in this.
That's hard to do. I mean, sometimes it feels like you think, oh, it might be easy, but that's really actually hard to do because you have stuff going on in your mind clouding it, you know, that an emotion that pops up. And then.
So here I am, Clark, I'm working with and resonating with George Banana's view of sadness. And I'm about to enter into the area of the article where I kind of go into it. And I just felt I needed to talk about my own experience. And I just opened it by saying, I'm no stranger to sadness. And that kind of gently opened that conversation. I don't like to put myself in my articles, you know, in those articles. So, but that worked pretty well for me. And I'm really happy about the way it came out. And so when I edit, so that's just what I do when I edit. I try to get into the headspace of the writer and see what the writer's goal is. I mean, there are a million ways to get an article from the beginning to the end. I don't have a set way. I only have questions if the writer is veering off or doesn't stay on the path, or if that way doesn't accomplish the goal. That's when I really start moving in, and I could really mark up a piece. If it doesn't accomplish what it sets out to accomplish in the writer's way, and then I'll intervene, usually with a ton of questions. Sometimes I'll just judge that the writer's never going to get this. This is just so far off that I'm not going back to the writer. I might ask a couple of informational questions, but I'll just take over, commandeer it. I like when that happens. But I mean, you know, it happens every now and then. And then, of course, the lousy writers are the ones who say, you really, you know, just overturn what I did. And the good writers, I mean, I can't tell you how many times this happens. The good writers send you gifts. Can't tell you how many gifts of D'Artagnan gift certificates I've gotten, or, you know, people know I like to cook. So, so that's when writers know that you've furthered their goals. So I'd like to choose writers I think are going to carry out the task and be able to do it. I actually had a writer a couple of months ago who I thought really missed the boat. And, but I worked with her. I sent her a manuscript embedded with a ton of questions. And I mean, she came through, she answered all the questions. I did kind of a heavy rewrite. And when we were done, she confided to me that she was not at her best when she was doing this, and thanked me. And that was, you know, and so I'll use her again. You know, this is, I wouldn't, but if this is someone who has that knowledge that, and I had used her before and I thought she was good and very editable and good to work with. But when someone can say, hey, you know what? It was an off day for me, and I'm aware of it. That, to me, that recognition is really important, because that tells me that they can really pull it off the next time. So those are all wonderful experiences in the life of an editor.
I have a question for you. With regard, you were just writing an article that has to do with essentially the stories of what people are going through. And there's something that I'd like to write about, and it's about something very inspiring that people have done. And I want to be able to tell the story from several points of perspective. Do you have any advice about how a person should lay that out? Is there a way that's an editor would look at that and say, this is the best way to go about that?
So are you talking about getting the stories, eliciting the stories from people?
Yes. Yes.
So that's really, to me, that's really the heart of an article. When an article is approached that way. So to me, an article is only as good as the questions it asks or answers. So it's really important to be able to sit with someone and ask, you're a psychologist. You're going to judge pretty quickly how someone works. And you're never going to get information out of them if your way isn't totally in sync with the way they talk and reveal themselves. So you have to find that fairly quickly. And, you start with softer conversation. And there's no subterfuge here. People know what I want to talk to them about in advance. And I was certainly never talk to anyone about grief who didn't want to talk about grief, who wasn't up to it, and certainly make allowances for someone to express whatever feelings, they have. But, I always have a list of questions in advance of what do I need to know from this encounter. Now, I never just, check off each question. Each question is a conversation. It's not, okay, I got my answer, move on. It's a conversation that you have to end when they end, although you can very skillfully guide the conversation. But, you have to do it in their frame, not in your frame, but having your questions in advance or knowing what you need to get out of it is really very important. And, is it difficult to interview a Renaissance weekender? No, these are smart, articulate people. So.
You love to talk.
Pardon me?
You generally love to talk.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, I made sure that Keely wanted to talk, was interested in talking. Actually, her daughter responded. I wished I could have included her in the article.
Her daughter's very interesting.
Oh yeah, Bally is interesting, and I wished I could have included her experience, but the article was already getting long, and I had included some experience of younger people who were missing out on things that you wouldn't think would be an opportunity for grief. And, you know, he was Bailey and she had to leave college very quickly and go home. And I mean, the idea, it's really a loss when someone's on the cusp of adulthood and they're trying their wings. You know, here they are at university and they're kind of spreading their wings and trying out themselves in interesting ways. And then you have to go home to your teddy bears. You know, it's like a little bit of a shock. And no matter how understanding your family is, and I know hers is understanding, you don't feel the freedom to exercise that new sense of self in that childhood parental environment. It will happen at some point, but rare is the 19-year-old who has the confidence of that new self to maintain it under those circumstances. So I felt a lot of sympathy for all these college kids who were suddenly summoned home or evicted from school and sent home. And I wanted to get that in the article. I implied it because I did deal with high school students who were missing graduation, and you know, people poo-poo it, just graduation, what do you miss? Well, you miss a pathway, you miss, it's not just the ceremony that you miss this, you miss marking a milestone that becomes a push-off to the challenges ahead. And so that was something that I dealt with. So I couldn't deal with all experiences of grief. I had to hit some sort of key ones and ones that people might think were not worthy of grief. So that was part of my challenge in the article.
We have a question for you from Mark.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I was a little late today. I actually emailed you during this talk. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to make it in time today. Some prose, and I'd love to get your opinion. The very last piece of text for my book is the inside cover flap. And I have been struggling with this for the past 2 weeks. And I'd love to just get another opinion, get a professional eye on it.
Can I do it now, or I haven't seen it?
I know you haven't seen it. I emailed it to you probably.
I'd be happy to look at it.
Please.
But can it wait until after we're done? Because
that's fine too.
Oh, okay. Because I really don't want to sit here in everyone's time and sort of read and, you know, kind of go off into. But I'd be very happy to give you feedback on it. So it's the back flap of the book?
Inside flap. I've got the back cover.
No, I know you have the back cover, but it's the flap of the.
It's the flap with the book summary.
Okay. Okay. So what's on the front flap? I know you have the cover. What's on that flap?
This is the, so I've got the front cover, back cover, the two flaps. The back cover flap will be the bio, will be my bio.
Okay, so this is the
front cover flap, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. That makes sense with the summary. Got it. Okay. All right. All right, we can deal with that. Be happy to give you feedback later.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted to do it on this, or I'd love.
I just don't. I wish I had known it before, because then I would have taken the time to read it before. But I don't want to take the time to read it while we're all in conversation. If you don't mind.
Oh, not at all.
What I'd love is if we can capture a before and after, and we can show it next week.
Yeah. Can we do that?
Can we do that? Oh,
Well, if you can help me before, just because I've got submitted
Oh,
this.
I'll help you
oh
before.
no. But we'll
I'll
show
do
you
it
before and
today.
after. Yeah.
Yeah, show
I'll
me
be
before.
happy to do it today, but what we'll do is we'll use it as a before and after for next week.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what other questions does anyone have? Debbie, I'm not sure I fully answered your question, but getting narratives from people, you have to construct the narrative because they don't necessarily have the narrative. And this is where writers are tremendously helpful in giving insight to the people that they talk to who don't necessarily see the thread or the value or the wholeness of their own story. So that's one of the reasons why I really like doing that kind of reporting when it's appropriate, because you're not only helping yourself find out how the ideas you're interested in thread through and express themselves in other people's lives as told in their stories, but you're helping them see the value of their life and their story and giving them kind of a through line that they may never have had. But it's very interesting. In the last piece I did on the Doctors in Crisis, when it was edited by my editor-in-chief, that had a lot of stories, a lot of narratives of doctors and their experiences. And they were good. I mean, doctors are smart people and, they're good to talk to. And if you can't ask leading questions because then you get what you want, but you're not necessarily getting what they have and the importance of their story. So you have to be really careful about not turning it into information that's you want it to be information that's real. You don't want to turn it into something you've imposed on them. And so my Doctors in Crisis article, which we ran at 5,000 words, which is really very long, I had lots of really interesting stories from physicians. And a couple of them were stories of doctors who were ready to pull the trigger on themselves. Those are hard conversations to have with people. And I had them in the article, and my editor-in-chief didn't want to take any of those stories out. Understandably, they were pretty powerful. But what she took out was the intervening narrative that explained why doctors were in crisis, and that had to be restored. And it's funny, the reaction I'm getting from physicians is that they feel that I totally nailed the pain that they have from operating the way they are now forced to operate, which is the part that had gotten cut out. I love the stories as much as anyone else, but the stories need something that ties the whole thing together, and can't cut that out either. But a good story a good narrative can really help express the idea and the get to the human importance of the idea. So I am sure that as a psychologist, you have all those skills to do. It's just you can't lead them, you know, and sometimes it takes a long time to get a story out of someone. And you know what? Sometimes you have to probe them to, in a very soft way, to tell you about their emotional experience, the emotional part of it. As you know, most people can't articulate their emotions. That's part of why they have so much distress. And so you, without telling them what their experience was or naming it for them, you have to ask them about the content of it and what it meant to them. And that, you find that just tremendously helps people. You know, so there are times when, you know, I feel like just in writing about it and getting a narrative out of someone, it's therapeutic for them too, to hear themselves and hear what it means. And I always like to feed back to them, you know, what I think it means. So it really becomes a fascinating interaction, and it's part of the job that I like. And I've been doing much more of writing that way over the past couple of years. So I really like that part of it.
Thank you. That was helpful. I especially think it was helpful to tie it back to something, to one key thing. That's helpful.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this is something you do every day. If you're administering therapy, you're getting stories out of people. They don't necessarily tie parts together. So I'm not doing it with the goal of therapy, but in their telling, it's often they see connections that they hadn't seen before, sometimes by a question I might ask. And it's very exciting to do that, you know, when you can do it. And I've been very lucky because I've been able to get some really interesting stories out of people. I'll never forget, I once, this is funny, one of my kids was getting a master's degree at Middlebury's bread loaf program. So up in Middlebury, outside of Middlebury, in the mountains. And I had written an article on bipolar disorder, and I had all this information from this expert that was really surprising. And so it's 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon in the summer, late summer, and I'm up in outside of Middlebury, walking across the lawn, and my cell phone rings. And of course, it's very hard to get cell phone reception there. And it's an editor from Time magazine who has seen what I wrote about bipolar disorder. And he's furious at me. And he said, how did you get that information from so-and-so? I talked to so-and-so. First of all, the chutzpah. Some guy at Time magazine thinking, well, if I don't have the information, how could anybody have the information? I mean, we won't go into that. But it was just like, well, I asked the right questions. I mean, what else do you say? So, you know, it all really hinges on the quality of the questions that you ask. And if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get interesting answers. And sometimes the question I ask is, okay, like what surprised you most, or, you know, upset you most, or what didn't you expect, or, you know, questions that don't formally fit the standard interview format, but where you want to leave room for someone to annotate their experience, and that's often really very helpful. So you can get some really good information that way, and you're not getting secrets, but you're just getting information that might not be divulged any other way, and someone might even feel comfortable with you to add more information. And that's what I always love, talking to people who, well, I can't talk to you, we haven't published this yet. So, and there are ways of talking to people too. Not subterfuge, but ways of getting information from them that, that's important. And, you're not confronting them. That's a style, that's some people's style, it's not mine. And some people are very successful that way. It's just not a style I'm comfortable with, because that always makes me feel like a failure. But I have
like a failure.
that you'll get good information. What were you saying?
Oh, what makes you feel like the failure? If I
have a confrontational experience with someone, and if that's the only way I feel I can reach someone, I feel like I've failed in some way. I've had too much confrontation in my life. And I mean, I grew up with a dad. He was a really good guy, but he was confrontational in his way. And you get to a point in life where you go, what a waste of time. There are other ways. And, so maybe that's my own thing. Maybe that reveals more about me, but I would prefer not to take a confrontational approach. I feel I can always get more by not taking a confrontational approach, but I feel a personal failure if I do, if that's the only path that I can find to somebody. I guess I just feel a sadness about it, that it just can waste so much energy that doesn't need to be wasted. And I'd rather not do it. Not that I haven't done enough of it in my life, mind you. Just, I don't want to do it anymore. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, I have two. Clark walked into the water a while ago, and somehow he's dry. I don't know how that happened.
That's how you know it's a virtual background. Right.
All right.
He didn't walk on the water.
That's next.
Right. New tricks.
Yeah.
This was related to something we were talking about last night. So the general question is, how does somebody know, or how does a person who wants to write know when they should pursue additional education? So like such as a writer's workshop or MFA or that sort of thing.
Well, first of all, there is a lot of discussion about the value of an MFA.
I meant to ask whether there was any. I meant to add that on too. Whether there was any value in any of those.
So there are things that you can get, okay, and I think that there's a real big difference in quality of the programs. But essentially what all of them do is have you write. And, there's just no substitution for writing. What programs formally do, here's some of the value. I've not had the advantage of a graduate program. But what they did, obviously one of my kids has, and he has a couple of master's degrees, and one of them was from the Bread Loaf program. But so what here's what the good programs do. So the good programs have you writing, and they'll use a variety of ways to get you to exercise and develop skills. So you might be asked to read a book and then to write in the style of that book or in the style of that essay. And so you get to, be very flexible and learn how to be flexible. And the goal is not to have you imitate, but the goal is to have you understand what it takes to write that certain way. And it's that process knowledge rather than the product quality that's really important. And you do that enough times and enough different styles, and you really learn something about yourself and the way you can write, and what it takes to do certain kinds of writings. That's what you're going to get really in good MFA programs. The other really good thing that you get out of them is that you have to learn, you generally are required to read to the other people in the program. So there are often set routines that, this session, the first 15 minutes is going to be person Q reading what they wrote over the last week to this group. And you get input from other people who are also struggling or learning the same kinds of things that you were. It can be good. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Depends, of course, on other people's motives in their critique. I mean, I once took a course at the New School on, I can't remember what kind of reporting it was. This was well into the early years of my working in journalism. And I took a course with someone who shall be nameless, who wrote really a major best-selling New York Times bestseller, and nonfiction. And she was the instructor, and I wrote a piece that I still think is a really good piece. And she had the class, so I read it to the class, or I read parts of it to the class, and now I was already a working journalist. And, I was in the early side of my career, but, I wasn't totally naive, and I had some skills. And the questions I got from my classmates were terrible. I mean, I was just, I was already an editor, yes, a young editor, and didn't have, the enormous experience that I have now and the same degree of confidence, but the questions were just, junior league. And so, and none of it constructive. And it was encouraged by she wasn't a professor, but by the teacher to like gang up. That the criticism, any kind of criticism, was good, and to gang up. And I was not the only recipient of it, but I mean, I just thanked everybody, and it wasn't at all helpful or useful in any way, nor did they give constructive criticism that much to other people. And so that was a weird class, and that reflected the value of the instructor, who just wanted pile on. Whereas, I mean, in some programs, it's really good if people are held to a high bar and are taught to understand what the goal is of the writer, and can help see into it and help further that. It doesn't always happen, but there are a lot of good MFA programs, and sometimes going just for that experience of writing and writing and writing and writing and having to present to other people is invaluable.
Yeah.
But it's not necessary.
Okay.
That's a point I want to make.
Right.
If you can find ways of writing, and if you have people you trust that you can show what you write to and feel like you get critiques that are helpful and that further your goals, I don't feel that an MFA is not required at all to be able to do that.
Right. I mean, I was, because the question came from like 2 or 3 conversations. One just happened last week. Actually, I had a situation like the one you talked about, with a lot of people not adding on very helpful critiques and wanting me to add something that I wasn't interested in. And I didn't respond as graciously as you did. And so in that situation, I actually went and wrote something else.
Wait, Dwayne,
Yeah.
I've thrown pencils at an editor. So, I claim, gracious, okay.
All right, I'll leave the story alone then. No, so I was reading a book, and then the person who wrote the book had a workshop, and it was a one-day workshop, and I said, this doesn't look like something that's going to be useful. And then the subject of the MFA came up a couple of days ago. And I think that the person that said it, I'm not sure if she was 100% joking or not, but I looked into it, and I had seen these like people who won Pulitzers in the program or something like that. And so I guess the question came out of that, like if I wanted to write that kind of book, or like look for that kind of award for whatever I'm doing, is it necessary to go through one of these programs to get to that level, assuming that that's a level and not marketing strategy?
Could be helpful, but it's not required.
Okay.
So
That's fair.
So here we are. It's after 4. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Mark, I'm going to get back to you. And
Thank you.
And Clark, I have a photo to send you.
Thank you. Thank you. As soon as we get off, I'm ordering the new edition of the book. That sounds fantastic.
Oh yeah, it's on Amazon, I can assure you, because I have it on my. I actually got the Kindle version. So so we'll see you next week.